Welcome to Knife Thoughts. This video is going to be my full review of this knife, and this is the Vosteed Telarurus. So this knife is named after a dinosaur, and so it's got this kind of unusual name, Telarurus, and I have seen them on their site also just call it the Tela, or Tala, T-A-L-A. But actually, the Telarurus is a dinosaur that you're probably familiar with if, like me, when you were young, you loved dinosaurs. It's an ankylosaurus or ankylosaurid, which is the armored dinosaurs with the club tail. So you are probably familiar with them from whatever various dinosaur medias you've watched or read. And so I know I was, and at first when I saw and heard this name, I was like, wow, what is that? But it is that armored club-tailed dinosaur, and I think it's a cool name. I like to see different names like that, just like I like to see bright colored knives. You might as well make the name unique instead of making it just like every other knife out there on the market. Now, why is it called that? Well, I think you can kind of see a little bit of that armored look with this almost a harpoon, which comes where this swedge comes in. So see how it turns up towards the tip here. And then it has this really nice swedge to the angle, and then another down towards the tip on this, what I would call a modified sheepfoot blade shape. So modified because, first of all, it does have some curve to the edge, and then also because of the different swedging and the almost pseudo harpoon there. So for me, I think that is the connection I'm making, that it has kind of an armored look to it, a little bit blockish towards the end there, but it is a modified sheepfoot. And I love sheepfoot knives, sheepfoot blades on knives. I think that they're really useful. Of course, there's something that has become more popular on modern knives recently, but they've been around on traditional knives for a long time. So I'll show you a traditional sheepfoot, which is like this, and you can probably see the similarities there. But it's a blade that is really useful for your normal daily use, like cutting cardboard, opening boxes, even some food prep. Of course, I use my knife for cutting food into small pieces for my son quite a bit, and this worked well for that. And I think it's a good blade shape. It seems to be ground well. Not necessarily the thinnest knife I've ever had, or certainly not the thickest either. It's a knife that's going to cut well, but not so thin that you have to worry about chipping the edge or anything like that. You can see kind of the cross section there on that tip. And so it works really well. I did use this knife a good bit while I've had it, and I've used it for some relatively rough stuff, cutting like fencing for some outdoor projects and such. And so I've had to sharpen it a couple times. You might be able to see a little bit of wear there from sharpening, and it sharpens really nicely. It has this 14C28N steel, which is not a super steel. It's not like MagnaCut or something along those lines, but it is a good steel, and it's something that, like I say, you can sharpen pretty easily. I felt like it took a nice edge and really wasn't, it wasn't holding an edge quite as well as a super steel like MagnaCut or 20CV or M390 or whatever, but it felt like it was well heat treated, and again, very easy to sharpen. So I do like that. Now, as for the mechanism, you can see that it's a crossbar lock, which most people know as an axis lock, but it's no longer patented for Benchmade. So a lot of companies are using these now, and Vosteed has put it on this knife, as well as I believe some others, and it works really well. This crossbar lock feels really solid. It feels like it has a little bit stronger of a spring than a lot of knives do. So I'll give you a size comparison right now, and also compare to the Benchmade axis lock. So here it is compared to a full-size Griptilian. You can see the full-size Griptilian is a little larger, but the spring on the axis lock, and now I've had this knife for a long time, so it's very broken in, but the spring on the axis lock is a little weaker than that on the Telarurus. So I do like that because you don't have to worry about it swinging out of the handle unless you really want it to. You could whip it out, but it's not going to unless you want it to, and it just feels a little bit more secure. This has a thumb disc opening, so if you're familiar with Emerson knives, a lot of Emerson knives use these thumb disc openings. I think it's an interesting choice. It kind of goes along with that blocky look, almost looks to me, if you use a little bit of imagination, like the club part of the Telarurus's tail. But it works well. At first I wasn't real sure about it, and that's because I was kind of trying to come up from the bottom like this, but I found that coming, well, I guess up from underneath, I found that coming up from the bottom here towards the tip is easier. I've got kind of meaty thumbs, and so I couldn't get under it very well here, but getting under it here, it opens nicely. You can also, of course, just pull the lock back and swing it out, and that's no problem. So it did work well for me. They have several different versions of this, and they have different colors on the thumb discs. So that's something to be aware of on this. And speaking of which, this handle has black micarta, but there are other versions. And for the handle, it's actually more comfortable than I was expecting, just because it's a relatively short handle, kind of smaller or thinner towards the butt than towards the pivot, but it's pretty comfortable. I've used it both like this, and of course in a pinch grip you can put your middle finger here, and then you can even kind of choke up. Now you do get pretty close to the edge there, so it's something that I would only do for, if you're trying to do some precise cutting paper or something like that. But I mostly just held it, in a pinch grip, like I think most actual cutting is done, and it's comfortable in that, but it's also comfortable in a hammer style grip. And as you can see, it has Vosteed's classic pocket clip, and it's a deep carry pocket clip, but because it's a little high on the handle here, you do have 1/4 inch or something, maybe a little more than 1/4 inch that sticks out, and it's nice and smooth. As you can see, no blade play, hasn't developed any, and like I say, I've used it pretty hard, and it locks up nice and solid forward and back. So overall, I think it's a very nice knife. Now, one thing, this knife is 3.03 inches on the blade, and I'm going to give you a couple other size comparisons real quick to a couple smaller knives here. So this is the Civivi Elementum, classic EDC knife, right around the same size, slightly shorter. And then there is the Spyderco Native 5, same deal there. And that's one thing I would say on this knife. I would make 2 suggestions for this knife, for Vosteed, and that is either to make it very, very slightly smaller so that the blade is under 3 inches. It's not something I have to, think about, but for a lot of people there is a 3-inch blade length law, something where I think it probably would be worth losing those 0.03 inches to make it under 3 inches, 2.98 or something like that, 2.97 if you want to go in increments of 0.03, but yeah, I think that would be a good choice. I also think, and this is what I actually told Vosteed, is that I think that this knife would be really nice a little bigger, so about a 3.5 inch blade. Now, I just tend to prefer modern knives in that blade length range anyway, but I do think that this blade would lend itself to that, and particularly the handle. I think if you had a little bit of extra space on the handle, it would work really well. So I think that this would work great in a little larger size. Well, I guess, a larger size or a very slightly smaller size, it would work really well. So again, I've enjoyed using this knife. I appreciate Vosteed sending this along for review. I always like getting to check out their knives. I think they are really kind of doing their own thing. There's a lot of knives that are out there right now, and Vosteed has kind of a unique feel. They feel like they're really engaged with the knives. I don't really know how to describe it, but I do enjoy getting to interact with them and check out their knives. So this is the Vosteed Telarurus. It is $72 on Vosteed's site. There will be links in the description, so make sure you check those out. And last but not least, well, actually, before we get to that, go to knifethoughts.com and subscribe via email. That's where I'm going to be really focusing on posting my content, not on social media, so make sure you're subscribed there. Also subscribe here on YouTube, and make sure you select notifications. And last but not least, don't forget to go out and do good.